Thank you. Good morning. I want to welcome people to the May 5th, 2022 online meeting of the Seattle Design Commission. Our meetings are designed to meet the governor's executive orders allowing online meetings during the COVID pandemic. Our meetings are being recorded through WebEx, copies of which can be made available after the meeting on request. In terms of today's meeting, we'll from 9 to 11, we'll be having our initial review of a new exhibit at Woodland Park Zoo. The discussion and action for this initial review will be led by Elaine Wine. From 11 until noon, we have a presentation on the Office of Planning and Community Development's work plan, which will be led by Lauren Flemister, OPCD's Deputy Director. After that, we'll break for lunch and be back for commission business from 12:30 to 1:30. And then from 1:30 till 3, we'll have a briefing by Seattle Parks on a new method for retaining consultants that they're looking at to be tested at Jose Rizal Park. That discussion will be led by Adam Almrein. In terms of meeting format today, the team will be briefing the commission soon on the proposal. There will be an opportunity for public comment as well through the hand-raising function on WebEx. We'll make sure that if members of the public do want to provide comment, we'll make 2 minutes available for each person. Following that, commissioners will ask clarifying questions, followed by deliberations. Again, the action will be led by Elaine Wine this morning, and the order for questions and deliberation is in the chat. Because we are using WebEx, it does allow for the public to participate in real time. Again, we'll have an opportunity for public comment if people have signed up or are present today and use the hand-raising function in WebEx to recognize themselves for 2 minutes of comments. And if there are people who weren't able to make a comment today, we're happy to follow up with them through email if there wasn't a chance to do that. Why don't we go ahead and start with introductions of commissioners in alphabetic order by their first name. And if you could also indicate the position that you serve on the commission as well. And then we'll follow up with introductions by the project team. And because we're on WebEx, if we can make sure that we mute when we're not speaking, that'd be great. Why don't we then, I'll go ahead and we'll start introductions. I think we'll start with Amalia Layton.
Hello, everyone. Amalia Layton Cody at the Transportation Planner Design Commission, and I will have video shortly, but I'm here.
Good morning, Elaine Wine, Architect Commissioner. As Michael said, I'll be taking the action today.
Morning, everyone. Elizabeth Connor, Artist Commissioner.
Morning, everyone. I'm Erica. I'm the Urban Design Commissioner.
Hi, Jill Crary, at-large Commissioner.
Hi, Matt Alfs, Architect Commissioner.
Good morning, Molly Spitalnik, and I'm the Get Engaged Commissioner and an Urban Designer.
Good morning, I'm Pooja Shah, the Engineer Commissioner.
And good morning, Vinita Sidhu, Landscape Architect Commissioner and Chair.
Thanks, Commissioners. If we can have the presenters introduce themselves.
Good morning, I'm Katie Bang. I'm the Senior Director of Maintenance Operations and Capital Projects for the Woodland Park Zoo.
And I can go next, and maybe I'll call out our team members to introduce themselves. So I'm Usama Kota with Element Architects, and maybe Jen Duhamel, if you want to go next.
Sure. I'm Jen Duhamel, Architect and Principal at Element Architects.
And Scott?
Scott Crawford, Project Designer at Element Architects.
And we have Lara.
Hi, everyone. Lara Rose, Principal Landscape Architect at Walker Macy.
And I think we're going to be joined by our colleague from CLR, but I don't see Greg on the call. Greg, are you there?
He's actually showing up in the attendees.
Okay. So I'm gonna make sure he gets. Oh, I see him there. Greg, can you?
Should be able to speak now.
Well,
We just made him a presenter so he can.
Perfect. So as soon as he gets on, we can introduce him. I'll introduce him to keep us going, but Greg Lester is with CLR, and CLR are helping us with habitat design portion. Of course, as a firm, they're well known for kind of some of their zoological projects around the country and around the world, really. I'll leave it there, but I see we have some other people also from Woodland Park that may want to introduce themselves.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I had a hard time getting in. I am not familiar with WebEx after all this pandemic time. I'm Sherry Harisny. I'm the COO here at Woodland Park Zoo and super excited to be working with this team. Thank you.
And that's us, Michael.
Great, thanks, Osama. Why don't we then, Katie, are you going to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll kick us off and answer a couple questions that I heard. I got in a little early just to make sure I could get in, so thanks for letting me in. So we're here today to present the Forest for All exhibit experience. We have changed the name officially of the project. It is a $35 million project with a construction budget of $22 million. There was some questions about the relationship of the zoo and the Parks Department. It is very complex, but the best way to explain it is that the Parks Department owns the land and the buildings, and the zoo operates all the services to operate the zoo, and then we also manage the animals as well. We just entered into our second management agreement with the Parks Department. So it used to be owned and operated completely by Parks until 2002. There was a 20-year agreement that expired, and so we're into our second agreement that just took effect in March. We also have a development agreement specifically for this project, which is still underway. $15.5 million of the funding for this project is from an insurance settlement from the fire of the day-night house. This project, we are, as you know, we are in concept design. We'll be heading into schematics shortly. Design will go through Q1 2024, and then we anticipate going into construction in the second quarter of 2024 through with an exhibit opening in Q1 of 2026. With that, I think that was some of the things I wanted to talk about. We will hand it over to Osama.
Great. And Jen, if you want to pull up the slides, see if we can do that. And hopefully everybody can see our slides here. And I'm just going to say a couple quick intro things here, but I wanted to mention that we're in here for our concept review. And just to frame where we're at in the project, you know, it's been an interesting project for us. And I hope what you'll see here is that we've been really focused in the concept phase, primarily on working with Woodland Park Zoo to craft a vision for what this project should be, to define some guiding principles for the work, and really to define an approach, and to think about how this project can really have an impact within the zoo, but also outside of the walls of the zoo. So I think it's a really great time to come in front of the SDC to get your feedback on the way that we've been thinking about that and approaching the project. So we have to start with the strategic plan. And through Woodland Park Zoo's work on their strategic plan, they've really been taking a bold step, I think, in advancing their mission, understanding the impact of our decisions and our actions on climate change and habitat destruction. The zoo is really placing themselves as a conservation organization with a commitment to make conservation and stewardship of our land and forests a global initiative which is deeply rooted in our community. If you go to the next slide, and as we've been talking about this, it really goes beyond just the animals, where connecting people to wildlife can foster a broader social movement for wildlife conservation, and where care and action can be a personal priority for all of us. And so if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to really briefly talk about where our site is, and the team is going to get into that in a little more depth, but we're the little white piece of land here. And of course, Woodland Park Zoo, for those that don't know, they've been an innovator in the world of zoos since the late 70s, as they started with kind of the larger approach to creating biomes and thinking about immersive exhibits and how that can be an important part of the zoo experience. And so with this new strategic plan and really understanding where we are in the world, it's been important for us to think about what are the next steps for a zoo, and for where can Woodland Park continue to innovate. And the project vision has really revolved around creating a social movement for conservation, reframing the experience around those issues of conservation, and leveraging empathy to build experiences with unique animals, talking about the extraordinary care, and then really thinking about exhibits as being flexible, not something that's going to be static and the same for 30 years, but how can it be a model that allows for change over time. So if you go to the next slide, and so therein lies our project. We have a working title, Forests for All, and we really see forests as at the center of all this. Conservation of our forests being critical to the health of the planet. The forests are the faces, or the faces of and so that's really been kind of what we're thinking about as we start to think about what should happen and what should we talk about in this exhibit, but also, or this experience, but also leveraging it across the zoo. And we wanted to start with a land acknowledgement, and to us, this is pretty important because we feel that acknowledging the importance of the land and what it represents it is so critical to the work that we're doing, and that it's important that we reflect on the indigenous past, present, and future of this place, and that we understand our own place within that relationship. I know we're all doing this virtually, so we're not in the same place. Some of us may not be in Seattle, but our LMN and the bulk of our team is here in the city of Seattle. Of course, this is the Seattle Design Commission, and Woodland Park Zoo resides on city land, as Katie mentioned. So this, what's up on the screen is Woodland Park Zoo's land acknowledgement. And they say these are the lands of the tribal signatories of the Treaty of Point Elliott, whose stewardship for the waters, plants, land, and animal relatives in the Northwest has continued since time immemorial. Woodland Park Zoo and our design team acknowledge this stewardship, the sovereign rights of the tribal signatories, and our responsibility to join with these tribes to inspire and advance the restoration of relationships between humans and the living world around us. So that's where we wanted to start. And we've set up an agenda today to really go through the big items that we want to look at and we want to touch on, the opportunities for this project and for the site, how we're defining engagement, our approach, and then we're going to talk about some of the conceptual studies that we're starting to work with Woodland Park Zoo on. And if you go to the next slide, we need to start with empathy. Zoos and aquariums foster meaningful emotional experiences in their guests. But as a team, we want to go beyond that. Empathy is an important driver for positive social change. So how can we leverage that? And we've been asking, how can we turn empathy into action? and leverage those experiences to create a social movement for conservation. And then on this slide, we've been thinking about an idea of transparency. How do we go beyond the animal experiences, turning the experience inside out and providing that level of transparency to daylight really the great work that Woodland Park Zoo is doing around habitat conservation, but also around providing ethical animal care, welfare, and enrichment. Typically, zoo experiences are passive. You know, there's a process of viewing and observing. And we're trying to ask, how can we create experiences that are also participatory and active, hands-on, engaging guests around conservation activities, and again, moving guests to action. And as a city, we're a technological city, right? Where technology is such a big part of our identity here in Seattle. So what does that mean for the zoo experience? Technology plays an important role with conservationists in the field. So how can we bring that experience back to Woodland Park? Could we track animals in an exhibit, monitor their vital signs, their heart rates, make connections back to conservationists in Papua New Guinea or other parts of the world? And then sustainability. We start with climate change and conservation. So how should that be reflected in the sustainable strategies for the project? And how can those strategies be integral to the guest experience? How can the building be a tool to inspire change in action? And within that, we know we really have to center our sustainable decisions around inclusion and social justice, and to support those that are most impacted by climate change and our impacts to the environment and habitat. And along those lines, we want to make sure that we're creating an inclusive experience. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we want to think about what voices, what ideas, and what perspectives are missing from the conversations around forests, conversations around wildlife conservation, advocacy, and climate change. And then we've been asking, how can this project not be a standalone experience, but perhaps be a trailhead, a place that reframes the experience and conservation efforts throughout the campus, throughout the Woodland Park Zoo campus, so that the experience is not bound by the site, the acres that we have, the small site that we have. And how can this connectivity be expanded? And how can this place be a center for advocacy that takes these ideas of forest and community-led conservation and links them to other places, to other communities in the Pacific Northwest, and then making real connections to people, places, animals, habitats around the globe, highlighting how our actions in Seattle and to Papua New Guinea affect our forest and our planet. And Woodland Park Zoo is engaged already in amazing community-led conservation work. I've mentioned Papua New Guinea. They're doing it there. They've got some great programs there and in other places. And that work isn't always daylit. So how can we daylight that work and make it an important part of the experience here at Woodland Park Zoo? And then if you go to the next slide, and we really want to leverage those connections and this project to catalyze those actions here at home, to inspire community-led conservation in the Pacific Northwest. That's a primary goal, but more importantly, to move people to action. And if you go to the next slide, and I think Laura.
Yeah, so we've been looking at, as Osama mentioned, how we leverage this site to tell those bigger stories. As Osama talked about, the theme of forests has become very central to the project. Our site is in the middle of Woodland Park, which is itself a forest in the city that supports lots of habitat as well as activities for people. And we are located sort of right in the middle of that. The site is shown here in that white hatched area. It's adjacent to the primary entry and circulation. And so for many people, the experience of this project will be their introduction to the zoo at large. For others who come in from the south entrance, this may be something that they encounter in the middle of their journey through the zoo, and something that helps them reflect back on things they've seen. And so we believe we need to design to both of those experiences. And we're really looking at how to use what's a very small site, just over 1 acre in size, to make those connections and tell that bigger story. We're up against a few pretty different conditions. The entry and the penguins to the left, very busy. The meadow, which serves an important public and civic function at the zoo. There are zoo tunes and other events that happen there. And then different exhibits, Banyan wilds representing South Asia, and then the tropical rainforest to the south, where we have gorillas and jaguars representing another type of forest. On this project, we are not trying to create another biome, but trying to kind of tell a more generalist, broader story about the role of forests relative to conservation and habitat throughout the world. And we're really looking at how to use some of the site's exceptional trees in structuring the approach to the site. It's perhaps worth mentioning that we just got a survey for the site this week. So all of this work is really more thematic and kind of conceptual in nature. But the site does have some incredible trees that are designated exceptional in the city of Seattle, including some Northwest natives at that gateway on the main east-west path that leads into the zoo. And so we have an arborist report. We've worked with the team to map the most significant and exceptional trees on site. And we're hoping to use these trees in a way that preserves them and then builds the experiences and the animal exhibits around them, so that we're really sort of working with the existing fabric of the site. And then finally, we're trying to figure out how we can leverage what many of us associate with forests, our Pacific Northwest identity, and kind of broaden that to our understanding and visitors' understanding of conservation throughout the world. Just as this project is more than the animals, forests are more than the trees. They're places where there are symbiotic relationships between many types of living organisms. They're incredibly diverse. I think 80% of the world's biodiversity is found in forests throughout the world. They're a source of food and safety for animals as well as people. And they're deeply, deeply related to water and soil conservation efforts throughout the world. And then there's also the human aspect of forests that the team is very interested in exploring and showcasing on this site. They are something that our understanding of forests is enriched by culture and told through culture. They're an economic resource. And so we've talked a lot about the theme of shade-grown coffee on this project, and that might become part of the experience in the exhibit. We really want to make sure that everyone understands that forests aren't just a static thing that exists to be preserved. They're something that are actively managed by people and by communities in the world. They represent succession. They go through many phases of kind of life themselves. And perhaps most importantly, they're core to our efforts to mitigate climate change. So all of these themes are things that we think can be told both in the building as well as on the site, perhaps on roofs, at different levels of experience throughout the site. And we're really excited to see how these develop.
So this is an important local but also international project, and we wanted to involve as many different perspectives as we can as we started this project and investigated some of these questions that Osama and Lara have noted. So we started our process with a lot of listening to the internal zoo community around what the zoo of the future could mean to guests and to staff and to the animal community. So we held a series of workshops with staff from across all facets of the zoo, including the staff in Papua New Guinea. We held a series of species workshops with curators and keepers. We held focus groups with volunteers. We brought together zoo and conservation leaders from around the world, as well as local informal learning experts like the Burke Museum, Seattle Aquarium, the Museum of Flight, and MoPOP. And we're going to continue to have conversations with those folks as we move forward. And from these internal groups, we gathered a set of priorities around animal care, empathy and inspiration, and guest action. And I'll discuss these a little bit more later. One of our first and critical next steps in schematic design will be to incorporate external perspectives. And we're starting our process with an equity analysis with our community engagement consultant, Hummingbird, who I think Katie will talk a little bit more about later. This includes a review of guest data that the zoo currently has. So from recent, and this is pre-COVID, exit surveys and point of sale zip code info, we can see that the typical zoo attendees are more white than the King County population. We also know that the median household income of zoo attendees is higher than King County. We know that many of our attendees have someone with a disability in their group, and these disabilities can range from physical to intellectual to sensory. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie to share a little bit about how Woodland Park Zoo has been working to improve access for our non-white and lower income communities.
Thanks, Jen. So we have a number of programs that we're really trying to change where that metric is and make sure that the zoo is accessible for all. And so we can have forests for all and zoos for all. One of them is the Community Access Program. And this provides 100,000 free tickets to human service organizations serving low income and at-risk children. Another is the Discover ticket. So you can get a $5 ticket if you want to come. And that is offered to foster families and recipients of EBT and WIC. And then we have membership. So if you want to come more than once, we have a $35 Explorer membership. And this is also offered to foster families, to EBT, to WIC. And we've been really trying to message these programs. I think they've been out there, but people just didn't know about them. So we've been working really hard to do that. And we've been seeing significant increases. We had 384% increase, for example, from 2020 to 2021. Zoo-wide, we're also working on the Empathy Collaborative. So it's a program that we just started. We have a staff here on staff that are working to engage with diverse communities, again, not just with this project, with the entire zoo, to connect and to bring opportunities to, we're looking kind of at the South region, Rainier Beach, South Seattle neighborhoods, and to give them some framework to build authentic and experiences for everyone to come to the zoo. And then we have a guest inclusion program, which also is really great. It's really getting people to come and volunteer and provide guidance in a volunteer kind of, role. And it focuses on accessibility and inclusion. Also, in 2022, we just hired a diversity, equity, access, and inclusion consultant, Davida Russell. We also have a DEAI executive advisor on staff full-time, Marvin Williams. Specifically to this project, we're going to have a press release coming out tomorrow. This is kind of the launch of the public part of the project. That press release will be going out along with a video that's going to be closed captioned and subtitled in Arabic, Chinese, English, Korean, and Spanish. We're partnering with Hummingbird, who is an outreach firm led by Karima Edwards. Some of you may know Karima. We did a lot of work together in the Parks Department. And honestly had the most successful public outreach that I've had in my career. She has a really great way of going to where the people are and getting them involved. And so we have a number of ideas roaming in our heads, making it fun, engaging possibly things like Pokemon Go, which is a game that a lot of folks come to the zoo for already, partnering possibly with the Seattle Housing Authority, the PNA, looking at other organizations. It has changed, the outreach, as you know, has changed during the pandemic. And we are really leveraging ways to use virtual opportunities and open houses to make sure we get successful outcomes. So we're just now getting on board with Hummingbird, and we're kind of going through that equity analysis, trying to make sure that we leverage those partnerships and go where the people are, so that we can really make sure we're, I guess, using those tools that already exist and not really reinventing the wheel, and opening the zoo walls and going to where they are. That's what I have. I'll kick it back off to you.
Sure. Well, so as Katie mentioned, we are ramping up to a major external engagement program early in schematic design, so that these perspectives can really help to shape the project as we move forward. As you all know, the summer is always more complicated, so we're going to be very busy in the next couple months, and then we will likely return for continued discussions with these groups in the fall. So this includes working with Headwater people to engage the Indigenous community, as Katie mentioned, working with Hummingbird and the zoo's Empathy Collaborative to define and then engage communities who are traditionally underrepresented at the zoo, people with physical and learning disabilities, and of course the zoo's 40,000 members and the general public. We also really include you on this list, given your design leadership in our city and beyond the city. So we're really looking forward to our conversation later today and to incorporating your feedback. So we are currently building on what we do already know, and that is that over 70% of people in the United States believe in climate change and are concerned by it. And we know that people who visit zoos and people who are in the Pacific Northwest are even more alarmed and even more weighted toward the left side of this chart. So we have more than 1 million visitors knocking at our doors of our zoo every year who want to help. But despite being smart, concerned citizens, they just don't know what to do. And maybe more importantly, they don't believe that their actions are really going to make a difference. So research tells us that to move people to action, we must move people along this experiential path. And historically, zoos have focused on building empathy, as Osama mentioned. And lately, zoos have begun developing and sharing real solutions. And we're going to continue to innovate and evolve those on this project. But zoos typically stop there. They stop before they give people the tools they need to feel truly empowered to take action and to feel like they are part of a collective solution. So in this new experience, we're going to take people along this entire path. And we have 3 secret weapons. So our first secret weapon is animals. Nothing puts people in the mindset to care like the amazing biodiversity in our world. And as Laura mentioned, unlike many places in the US and in the world, people here in the Pacific Northwest identify with nature because trees and forests are part of our daily lives. So how can we leverage this existing identity? And finally, the Woodland Park Zoo has been quietly developing one of the most powerful success stories about community-led conservation on the planet, the Tree Kangaroo Conservation Program in Papua New Guinea. To meet the Woodland Park Zoo's mission, our project's success will be measured by activating impactful conservation action. And our project theme of interconnectedness combines our secret weapons together. People, animals, and forests are interconnected communities. So working with our local and international learning experts, we identified a set of experiences that will empower guests to impactful conservation action. And I'm going to get into that in a little more in a few minutes. We then used activity-based programming to collect the wide range of activities that could create these experiences. And we then identified a set of spaces that best support these activities. So in all of our spaces, as Osama mentioned, we will be encouraging guests of all ages to not just observe and read signs, but to participate and explore. So taking advantage of those 18 exceptional trees that we have on this site, we'll be creating an experience that provides many perspectives on the complexity of forests and their role in our world. Talking with others about conservation is key to retaining information and moving toward action at home. So seeing other people talk about conservation also really builds a sense of collective action. So we will have a large, flexible multimedia space that we're calling the Plaza, where people, and that's guests, staff, and even people in Papua New Guinea, and honestly also animals, come together at various scales and talk about their conservation experiences, their questions, and their ideas, and see themselves as part of a larger collective. We'll have a makerspace for people to use open-ended creativity to bring their own conservation solutions to life and put them out into the world. So this could be making something with your hands or working together across communities to identify conservation challenges and solutions. We are all very lucky to be able to make choices about what we buy, and that can be more powerful than we realize. In our coffee bar / market, people will be given the opportunity to use that ability to choose to support the people who protect our forests. For example, this could mean buying a cup of Papua New Guinea coffee, it could mean sustainable honey, or even vanilla. We want people to literally get their hands dirty, open their minds through new experiences, and have space to contemplate. In schematic design, we're going to be exploring these interpretive experiences in more detail, but for example, we could have permanent or temporary experiences that involve guests in science, from exploring a real-time dashboard of animal health, or maybe even tracking wild tree kangaroos as they move through the trees in Papua New Guinea in real time. These could also include multisensory forest experiences, or exploring the impacts of climate change, or being part of the fungal networks beneath the surface of our forests. And yes, there will be animals. The animals in this experience are the faces or avatars of forests, but these are specifically forests where conservation has become a local community movement. Guests will discover the innovative solutions that communities around the world are bringing to wildlife conservation and climate action, and how they as guests can boost their impact from home, at school, in the office, and at the polls. So with our first avatar, your purchase of shade-grown coffee supports the landowners who protect the cloud forest, and in turn, protect the Matschie's tree kangaroo. Choosing sustainable palm oil supports communities in Malaysia and Thailand who are replanting palm forests and making nest boxes. These boxes replace the lost cavities in old growth forests, which the rhino hornbill needs to survive. And in Nepal, local forest guardians monitor and patrol forests to prevent deforestation and poaching, which is supported by your choice of FSC certified wood and paper products. Because we're looking to create a new and innovative experience, defining a space program has been a design task in and of itself. Using the experiences I just shared as a guide, we currently have these space types here identified. We've taken these spaces and studied how they might be organized. And instead of a typical linear exhibit approach where you go in one entrance and come out the other, we've landed on an organization that really embodies interconnectedness. There are multiple ways to enter, with the plaza at the very center. And in the plaza, the guests will dialogue with others about conservation, interact with our avatars and their stories, and get inspired to continue acting for conservation at home. Ultimately, this focus on interconnectedness between people, forests, and action will reframe the rest of our guests' zoo experience. Scott.
Thank you, Jen. So far we've shared the range of ideas that we've been in discussion with the Woodland Park Zoo and our other teammates about. And as we're taking all of these ideas into consideration, we're looking at how can we begin to apply them to the site. So early on within this, we took and did a number of spatial experiments, I would say, with trying out ideas in model form to share with the zoo potential experiences that we could begin to develop around the edges of the site and then in the center. And what we're going to share with you today is not by any means a fully developed design, but instead a collection of various observations that we've had through these experiments and things that we hope to carry forward into schematic design to develop into a full experience that helps to execute on the mission that we've shared so far. So again, in looking at our site, we have the previous day-night house located here. And then, as was mentioned before, the connections over to the west entry plaza, to the north, the meadow, and to the south and east, the other exhibits around the campus. One of the things that really struck us when we first visited the site were the trees located there, and then in the arborist report, understanding that a number of these are then deemed to be exceptional trees, and also the bold area you see this exceptional grove of trees. Given the concept and focus of this project of Forest for All, we believed that it was important for us to recognize and respect all the existing trees we have, and then see what we could do with the development of this project to allow the majority of those, if not all, to remain intact. So then when it comes to looking at the building, we're taking and analyzing where we currently don't have trees, such as the existing location of the day-night exhibit that will be demolished as part of this. There's other hardscape pathways that currently go through and access roads that we're going to be leveraging, and looking at how can we take and develop an experience and a building on this site that helps to fill in further the tree canopy that already exists. While it might not be doing that just with trees, it's trying to create a building that helps, or that begins to feel as if it is part of that overall experience of the forest. And as has been mentioned, we're looking for not this linear progression through the site as you might experience in other areas of the zoo, but instead using this site as a trailhead for orienting zoo visitors towards the zoo's mission of conservation. And so trying to take and develop a number of pathways that would pull you in from the various areas around us and lead you into the center of the site. And at the center of the site, we're looking at having that plaza and exchange space. And this, we believe, is really important, that it's not something that you come to first necessarily, and it's not something you come to last, but it is always at the center. And surrounding that will be all of these other unique experiences. And the goal with the project then is using that plaza to interconnect all of these other spaces so that wherever you're coming from, you eventually come to that center and you start to engage in dialogue with others, whether that be zoo staff or other visitors, about the things that you're experiencing, and start to see the interconnection between these issues at a larger scale. So with all of those explorations, we've settled on a number of guiding principles that we're going to continue taking forward, such as protecting those existing trees, using the building as an extension of the canopy within the roof, creating these multiple site linkages, using the exchange or the plaza at the center to help reinforce that interconnectedness, and also developing a three-dimensional guest and animal movement experience so that we're not just always on the ground plane. So as we're doing this, we're exploring it in both digital models as well as physical models. And these are things that we hope to carry forward into all of the interactions that we have with the various other communities to help take and allow others to see and to some extent experience what it is we're proposing for this site. And so we've got a number of views of some of the models we've been developing so far that just take you around the various edges. We've been finding it's helpful to have these in group conversations just to allow others to engage with what we're seeing and get their own perspective on it. And then we've also been developing some sketches that are abstracted from this, as well as trying to give more of an experiential view early on. And with that, we're trying to settle on what are the parts of the experience that we want to create as the sequence of visiting this. And as a part of arriving from that west entry plaza, not wanting to have a building that is up front and center right along that edge, but allowing that exceptional grove of trees that exists there to be the initial piece that you come across, but allowing the building to be something that exists behind that, that entices you into exploring further into the site. We're also looking at wanting to break free of the typical experience of the zoo right now, which is traveling along pathways that always stay on the ground, and looking to have more of a three-dimensional experience. If we're talking about forests, we want to be both on the forest floor, as well as the ability to descend into the forest floor and be at more the level of beneath the soil. And then in a forest, being able to travel up into the canopy and experience it more in the ways that some of the animals would be experiencing. Important to that as we continue to study this is making sure that these pathways that allow you to go up and down from that consistent ground plane around the edges are always going to be accessible. Being able to not take and rely on a set of switchback ramps just to get someone up to a higher spot, but looking at how we use those ramps and sloped walkways and circulation to allow for a longer immersive experience through this site, and allowing your ascent or descent on the site to be integral to your experience of the exhibits that are going on. As we continue to develop this, we're looking at an exhibit that is going to exist on multiple levels. We're imagining it's probably on the scale of around 30 feet for the overall height of this. But again, we're still studying that. But we do believe it's very important for this exhibit to not just be existing on the existing ground plane.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott, and good morning, everybody. So I will walk you through a series of 5 sketches that really start to explore this notion of weaving. And you'll notice it's a common theme with all of the presenters so far about how do we meet the goals of this project? How do we really immerse our staff and our visitors into the forest setting? And so again, these sketches test that notion of weaving landscapes, the forest setting, animals, guests, and even staff in a compelling way where they continue to work off of each other. So again, these are not solutions yet. You know, they're more storyboard images, if you will, that start to test experiences. And if these experiences in the end achieve the goals that we want for this project, then it allows us to continue to move into detail and really figure out how can we pull these off, where do they belong, and how do they fit within the overall project program. So this first one we call the vertical forest transect, and it's real simple. It's to suggest that, wow, how amazing would it be if we could create this mixed species habitat setting? Is it outside? Is it in a beautiful greenhouse? Those details are to be determined. But what if we could bring guests, as an example here, up to an arboreal level where these animals naturally thrive and live? So in this case, tree kangaroo, or red panda, or birds, or even snakes, or even bats. And how could we execute this? And how compelling would that be as a visitor to be up 10, 15, 20 feet, as Scott said, maybe even a little bit higher, in order to have this level of an experience? And even at the forest floor level, you know, allowing folks to really, and the visitors to really be immersed in the forest setting, create these participatory environments, even layers and levels of adventure and exploration throughout the site. You know, this is an example of an opportunity for kids to explore the trunk of a tree and really understand all the microorganisms and microhabitats that live within. And then the next image is really touching on this notion of what we call transparency. And this is an example of what we call an animal care hub or station that happens to be at the ground plane of the forest floor. But it's really changing the paradigm in the way these habitats could perhaps be managed. Create these adjacencies of these hubs that may be locations where diet food is prepared, or they could be stations where there are animal health checks that happen. But could these be placed, just imagine 4, 5, 6 of these hubs that could be located throughout the site and placed in environments where animals naturally thrive. So whether it's at the forest floor, mid canopy, upper canopy, maybe even below grade, and allow animals to sequence in and out by choice. And even if we could take that to the next level, what if these are, again, locations where staff work and have the ability to monitor and observe animals? And if we can really be good with our placement and design of things, how can we have visitors be adjacent to these spaces, maybe even participate in some of these activities of care and research? And that's what this image is starting to look at as a transect, but again, this could happen at multiple levels, even upper canopy. The next image, really, this is what we call coffee with context, but it could be other levels of commerce. The concept here is, what if we could tell the story, for example, of sustainably grown coffee? And what are the direct impacts that that process has on the natural environment and the animals and the people that live within? So this could be coffee, could be vanilla, could be honey, but talking about the sustainable ways of that commerce, and how incredible would that be for guests to have that one-to-one experience? Maybe this is a space, as well as Jen described, our maker spaces. Perhaps this is a location where guests could participate in cupping or cleaning beans, simply just enjoying a cup of coffee. We think this level of weaving and integration really helps tell that story. And then finally, this is an image that tests a scene or a scenario within the plaza, if you will, or in the engagement space. You know, we all envision this, we believe, as a combination of passive or contemplative spaces as well as very active dynamic spaces. And this is a scene where if we could capture an edge of the engagement space where there's a bit of a scene we call habitat theater, but imagine an environment where animals can sequence in and out by choice. It's an incredibly beautiful setting. If you were there for 15, 20 minutes, the scene constantly changes because animals have the ability to sequence in and out by choice. So these are just some examples we're starting to study at a storyboard level to see, again, do these capture the goals of the project? Can we create this level of weaving of habitats, staff environments, visitor environments that really just create an incredibly dynamic environment?
So, we did want to end here. You know, clearly we're in the early stages. It's you know, conceptual work. We're really focusing on the vision, but the impact is really important to us. So, you know, we thought we'd throw this question out to all of you as you think about your questions for us, but mainly because it's so important to us, is to think about what should the impact of this project be, you know, 5 years after it opens. And somebody mentioned to me that 5 years isn't a long time horizon, but I think given the urgency of what's happening in our world and the need for change, 5 years sometimes seems like a long time. So we'll end there and look forward to your comments and questions around the project.
Excellent. Thank you, Osama and team for a excellent presentation. Vanita and commissioners, I put in the chat the order again for questions and then deliberation. Vanita and people who are present, we do have one person who's attending, although I do know that this person who's attending probably doesn't have any questions. She's our new intern. She's currently working with us remotely and will be joining us in person. She's in her final year at Illinois Institute of Technology as an architecture and urban design student. So we wanted her to attend today because we thought this project would definitely resonate with her. So her name's Alondri Stein. Welcome, Alondri. Glad that you were able to break away from class to join us. We'll keep an eye out in case anyone joins, but I don't think we have any members of the public today.
And do we have anybody from other city agencies? I'm not sure that they would be attending this meeting, but
yeah, I don't think so. And they would be just as an attendee. They would have been made a presenter. So I don't see anybody else. But again, we'll keep an eye out in case someone joins at the last minute. In terms of the order for questions and deliberation, again, Elaine is going to lead us in that effort. I think we're going to start with Jill, if I'm correct. So I will mute and send it to you, Elaine, and then starting with Jill.
Great, thank you. Right, so we'll start with questions first, and then we'll go back around and we will deliberate. And I think before we get started, I just wanted to walk through some of the things that we might consider, you know, beyond the question that was posed of the, you know, where should this project be in 5 years, or what are some of the outputs of the project in 5 years? But some of the other things to consider is how the concept for developing the space, like how does that help achieve the intention of motivating people towards conservation? Another item for consideration is how the concept will impact underrepresented groups that it's intending to attract. and to also think about the public engagement network that was addressed and the strategy of advancing equity. Another item for consideration has to do with the trees and how the concept really maximizes retainage of those trees, and probably just really looking more at sort of the physical components of the site and how it weaves into the park overall. And then also thinking about the animals, and maybe we need to know a little bit more about the types of animals that might participate in this immersive experience, and the opportunities for flexibility, probably not just for the animals, but for the overall exhibits themselves. I think they really spoke to wanting it not to be just a static types of exhibits, but ever changing. So those are just some of the things to think about. But with that, we will start with questions. And I think we've got until 11, so we've got a healthy amount of time today, which is great to talk about this very interesting project. So we'll start with Jill. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. And I appreciate you going back to these issues of what perspectives are missing and how this concept actualizes some of that stuff. And I guess I really just have sort of one question. It's sort of an overall question, which is, did you think about building nothing? Did you think about, is there a way to meet your goals and your concept without concrete and footings and fancy roofs? And I'm really interested in exploring the less is more side of what we talked about today and how that affects some of the early conversations about equity and other things.
Yeah, Jill, I'll start with that and maybe have some of the team members jump in. But that's a great comment. I would say conceptually, yes, we have thought about building nothing. We're still thinking about that. I think not necessarily nothing, but we are still in conversations about how much do we build. I think sometimes we default to the term building, and I think a lot of our conversations about, is it really a building? I think we're starting to use the term experience. I think what we do know is, the idea of what we have come to through the concept design process is really to think about what are the parts and pieces, not necessarily what are the buildings, what is the architecture that's needed to motivate people to change, but what are the parts and pieces that we need to have to really foster those conversations. And I think a couple things that we are really thinking deeply about are, one, and Jen kind of got to this to some degree, but how do we leverage the animals, but also the other exhibits at Woodland Park in a way that really moves people? How do we create places that may or may not exist, but probably don't exist, where these conversations can happen, where people can have conversations, maybe even have those passive experiences? What does that mean? Is that somewhere outside or inside? I think we're still digging into that, but we know that those, as Jen talks about the plaza, I think we've come to an agreement internally in the team that there is a plaza. What that plaza is something that we're still digging into. Is that how much of a built form is that? How much of a built form is it not? And so I think that's a great question, and we are trying to dig into maybe not building nothing, but how much of this and in what form do these programmatic elements take to really give that different experience. So I know that's a windy answer, but it's partially because the team is still wrapping our heads around what that all means and what it should mean for a project like this. And Katie's Katie maybe can jump in here.
I wanted to say that it is so much more than just the building. So I see that perspective of why build nothing. And what we're really looking at is this is the new way to zoo. And this is what the future of zoos should be. It should be more than just the brick and mortar of the place and how those connections foster conservation missions throughout the world. And we're really looking at this, as Osama mentioned, as kind of a trailhead or a marker for how we can do that throughout the zoo. And we are doing that, but how can we connect that message better? And then how does that message resonate into our long range plan and into futures planning of the zoo and then other zoos too around the world?
Okay, thank you. I forgot to look at who's next here.
Erica's next.
Fantastic.
Hi, guys. I am so excited about this project, so I'm going to try hard to stay short. But I don't have a lot of questions. I'm very excited to get into more of the conversational portion of our discussion. But I guess my one question really did fall back on what Elaine was saying. It's hard to imagine how much of a sort of indoor-outdoor experiential / engagement experience this is without knowing if there is going to be like any type of like actual animal habitat that is taken into account, and the sort of safety mechanisms, the control of, you know, temperature, all of that, if there's any of that at all included within this design, or if it's strictly natural Pacific Northwest, you know, existing landscape that can be fully interacted with and isn't separate from the people experiencing the site. So I think that was really my biggest question, because in the sketches, which I think are really beautiful and very communicative, it very much felt like you could move in and throughout the space entirely. And I think the opportunity for it to be not a fully enclosed space presents itself through those images. But I wasn't quite sure from a purposeful mechanism if that was possible, or if there still needed to be some type of glass enclosure that would separate folks from that space. So I guess that was my only question.
So those are great questions, and I'm glad Elaine brought them up as well, because those are again a lot of what we're working through as a team. And I'll let others get. I think we're pretty passionate about how we're thinking about that. There will be animals associated with this project. We're kind of still working through what those animals, the final animals will be, which I think is fairly unique, because a lot of projects at zoos start with the animals and they develop from there. And here, Woodland Park, I think, is taking a really innovative approach, which is let's start with kind of the approach and the larger vision, and then work from there as to what is going to support that and what is going to be important. We are currently thinking, you know, Jen mentioned the avatars, as she talked about tree kangaroos and red pandas and hornbills. We don't know if those are the final animals, but those are some of the ones that we're thinking about, and really tying them back to the conservation story and their role as kind of important species for forests being kind of the larger theme here. And then there'll be, we keep talking about it as supporting cast of animals. We imagine that there would be a lot of supporting members to this experience, and we're still working through what that means. Of course, all of that, those decisions come back to what's inside and what's outside, how much of the guest experience is inside and outside. But to the largest degree possible, we want to blur those boundaries and really make it so that it feels different. Again, that it doesn't feel like you're on one side of the glass looking in. But, you know, obviously thinking about the health of the animals and the experience of the people. But we are in the midst of really diving into what is landscape, what might need to be covered, what might need to be enclosed, and how does that create an experience that people can really engage in. Jen or others, do you want to, maybe Jen and Greg could provide a little more to that?
Sure. Osama, I think you covered that pretty well. I'll just add that I think it will very likely be a combination of environments as the collection plan evolves with the overall goals of the project. I think what's very important here is the ability for exceptional welfare and choice for the animals. So, you know, I believe this will end up being a combination of climate controlled, almost greenhouse type space that can support a collection of subtropical to tropical animals. I think there'll be some outdoor spaces that are enclosed in mesh, like an aviary, for example, that would allow for full flight for birds, ideally all in mixed species environments. And then there may even be some open habitats completely immersed in the forest setting that are open top, if you will, and yes, perhaps have some glass and other materials. But in the end, you know, what we're all striving for here is the ability to flex, for it to be dynamic. It's something that the Woodland Park Zoo team has challenged us with from the very beginning, to say we need the ability to change and to flex and evolve, and those things have to happen. These can't be static one animal exhibits that have been done many times before. So we're moving into a more modern zoological experience that ideally allows for time sharing, lots of movement, lots of animal choice.
And I want to add to that too. When we think about zoos, we obviously go to the animals, but a big part of Woodland Park Zoo, I mean, it's almost a botanical garden. I mean, it really is. And so when we talk about forests, also, you know, the plants and the trees clearly are an important thing that we're thinking about, and what parts of the site don't have animals, and how can that be an important, again, maybe not a passive part of the experience, but an important part of the experience that the guests can interact with. So, you know, what is the role of the landscape has always been important in these projects, even more so, I think, here.
You know, to that point, Osama and Erica, you know, on your question about the trees, even though we are saving these big trees and they become sort of the structure of the site, it's not like we have this, you know, pristine, you know, Pacific Northwest ready-made forest that we're working within. It's a hodgepodge of stuff. And so part of, I think, what we're interested in doing once kind of animal program and sizing for habitats, you know, gets more solidified, is really looking at what portions of the site can do what from a vegetation and interpretive standpoint. Some may be, and the site itself may evolve quite a bit over time. You know, there might be portions of the site where we explore forest succession, or we explore some aspect of forest, like the forest floor or canopy. You know, but we're not fooling ourselves that we've got sort of like instant forest and instant, you know, canopy walks within it. It's something that's actually going to be, I think, a pretty interesting challenge to kind of weave together the animals and the people and the environment.
Great. Did you have any other questions, Erica?
Oh, no, I just kind of hand it over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. This is a fascinating project. I really appreciate the presentation deeply. And one of the things that really interested me when I looked through it even before this meeting was how you're zooming out from a very specific Seattle location to you know, a broader perspective, including worldwide. So I have a question about your partnership with Papua New Guinea. Are there others that you are anticipating? Is this the only one in terms of the, you know, the broadest possible outreach?
Katie, do you want to speak to that, and then or Jen?
Can you rephrase the question? Are you asking if there's other communities that we're reaching out to other than Papua New Guinea?
Worldwide, yeah. Yeah.
We're worldwide for this project. We're really focusing on the Papua New Guinea story and tree kangaroos as kind of the spearhead. Sherry can also talk maybe more about red pandas and Nepal. We're also connecting the forest idea to Lummi tribe and bringing it more local as well, because we are realizing that if we really want conservation action to happen, if you don't identify with what's going on and take it in a personal way, how are you going to move somebody? And so the forest idea really came also with the Pacific Northwest, Woodland Park Zoo kind of being a forest in Seattle. And so we're looking to, and we have been actually working with the Lummi tribe and Papua New Guinea as well, and connecting those two in particular for this.
Thanks, Katie. That answers another question I had. I'm delighted to know you're working with Lummi on this. I worked with King County ecologists on a levee setback in Carnation, and one of the things I learned from them, a phrase they used that I'd never heard before, this was several years ago, is the forest is fish food. And I think that's amazing. And it's also possibly another kind of layer that you might be able to use, even though you are not. Yeah, everybody's nodding, so I'm not going to make a larger case for it. But there's not an actual visible river there, but it might be a good connection to the watershed as well.
I do want to just say that all of this is connected, and we have a Living Northwest trail exhibit area biome that we're looking that we're renovating. We're in phase 2, and we're looking a lot at the Pacific Northwest and rivers and other things in there, as well as some other conservation missions that we have. It's really exciting. It'll be open in September, including the Western pond turtle work that we're doing. But I could talk forever about that.
Great. Related to that, I appreciated your creating openings in the walls or gates, or being transparent and actually going outside this particular 1 acre site. I'm wondering, all the way to south parts of Seattle, in terms of equity, are you able to include people who might not otherwise be involved in the design and thinking process over time? For example, inviting someone that is, currently unknown to the team who does come from a neighborhood that would not necessarily access Woodland Park Zoo.
Yeah, and I kind of futzed over that part a little bit in the presentation, but we do have the Empathy Collaborative, which is a group that's doing exactly that. We're looking at the voices that aren't heard right now and how can we bring them to the zoo, not just with this project, but also for others and just for the zoo's mission. And their goals are to meaningfully connect with the community members, focusing on Beacon Hill and Rainier Beach, but also others. Building relationships that go beyond just a visit to the zoo and co-creating zoo programs with community. We have a learning and innovation team on staff that works on education. And then we also have an engagement department. And so it's kind of a relationship with all of those groups to make sure that we're continuing that mission and getting voices that are not just here. We know the zoo's a regional draw as well.
Jen, did you want to talk specific to this project, kind of what we're doing?
Yeah, and so Katie alluded to this as well, but we are bringing on an engagement consultant. The name of the consultancy is Hummingbird, who has a deep experience at reaching out to underrepresented groups in the Pacific Northwest, and in particular in King County. And so I think what's really exciting to us is that our next step is exactly what you're talking about, Elizabeth, is to actually really reach out, identify who those folks are, reach out and really bring them into this process right at the beginning of schematic design so that their perspectives are included right from the beginning. So it hasn't happened yet, but it is absolutely, and we're really excited about it. We think that's going to make for a much more engaging, exciting project. So we really feel like we have to have that to really move forward at this point.
And I do want to say, you know, as we've been talking about it, I mean, I think the typical version of this is that we go and check the box and we go to the communities and we do a nice little presentation for them and say, what do you think about zoos? Kind of like what we're doing with you all. But our goal is to be more intentional than that. And so when the team talked, you know, we have Hummingbird to help us bridge to those communities, but I think the intent is to find a way to keep some of this thinking and some of these groups engaged with us. I won't say groups, but key members of various communities engaged with us throughout the design process. We've done that before. We also engage with Headwater people because we feel the indigenous piece is important, and they provide a unique, it's a very different community, and they provide a unique niche and access to that community in a way where we can do a similar thing, where we can have you know, groups that we tap into through the design process in a meaningful way. Some of you may know Valerie Segrest as well from her work on the waterfront and her work with us on the Seattle Aquarium. And so she is a consultant to our team, and also our hope is that in addition to the great work that she'll do as a consultant, we hope that she can also help us bridge to some communities that we might not typically have access to. But I think that's a great question, Elizabeth. But our goal is, and we'll come back to you and hopefully be able to talk, we'll be beyond the phase of planning, which is where we are now, to action. But the goal is to have this be something that's really meaningful and embedded within the work and the team.
Thanks. That's really helpful. I have one more. For this project, could you define avatar?
Jen?
There's a lot of definitions. So
Yes, there are a lot of definitions. So this is a word we have been trying to figure out the right word for too. But I think the way that we're looking at it is that there are forests in the world. For example, the Papua New Guinea cloud forest, where there are there's a lot of biodiversity, an amazing amount. And we are looking, we see these, we talk about these avatar animals, so like the tree kangaroo, as the face of that forest, as the face of the communities, the people who are protecting that forest. And so it's a way of sort of giving a face to a much larger set of interconnected people, animals, and forests.
thanks.
So it's a hard word to define.
Thank you. That's helpful. I'm going to pass it on to Molly. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you so much for the thorough thinking on the conceptual phase. I also similarly really appreciate your further answers about how you're engaging the Headwater people and your work alongside Hummingbird. And it's really helpful to hear that those groups will really be helping drive the design and the thinking about how you're discussing conservation as well as kind of embodying conservation in the work. So we'll be excited to see that as you keep moving forward. A couple of questions on my end. So I was curious about the percentage of people who enter from the west entry versus the south entry.
Yeah, Katie, I don't know if you have those numbers. We've talked about it, but I don't have those at the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, I don't.
I can offer just a little perspective from what we've heard from the zoo, which is that they tend to try to draw most people into that west entry. That's the main sort of guest entry. The groups that come in the south entry tend to be the bigger groups like school buses or tour groups. Because there's the kind of larger parking spots for those groups. So there is a fair amount of people that do come in that south entry. It's definitely something we're considering as an important part of the project, that experience.
Great. And with, go ahead.
One thing I'd add to that is, and maybe this is where you were driving with the question, but you know, we have been thinking about this project, the need for this project to do two things. One is to be that trailhead. When you get there, it's the first thing that you're at, and it reframes your experience. But we also know that it may be a place on the journey. as people come to Woodland Park. And so we are thinking about it in that way as well. But I think there are ways we can think about creatively building anticipation. So when people get there, they're aware of where they're going, and it starts to kind of reframe what they've seen. And so we are trying to think about that and think about those sequences a little bit. And obviously it's a dynamic experience. It's only a piece of it, of the whole experience at Woodland Park.
And Molly, as someone who grew up in Seattle, I only went in the south entrance. So to me, that is the main entrance still in my brain. And so Osama's points are really important, how we sort of link that into the larger experience.
It's nice that you have team members who see it each way, so you can really think through, how people will experience it each way. And it'll be interesting to see as you continue forward, if a lot of people who come to the south entrance will come up, start there, whether they're guided there or whether it's really an integral midpoint. But thank you. That's really helpful and really clear. A similar question would be what your thinking is about the relationship to the neighborhood in each direction, and also about the access and use by the community.
Yeah, I don't know if Lara and Scott maybe want to try to hit on this a little bit. I've been thinking about it.
Scott, why don't you dive in?
It's an interesting topic because it's one that came up early on of how could we take with this idea of reaching out and doing community-led conservation, how much can we tie ourselves into the surrounding community? And I think that there are some limits there for us, such as the paid ticket entry to the park, but that doesn't preclude us from being able to have times where we can open it up more, such as if there are going to be concerts going on in the meadow with Zoo Tunes, how can we take and make this exhibit an extension of that? How can we make it feel like you could have this additional experience as part of our exhibit while that's going on? We've also talked about the ability for this space to not just be something that is used during zoo visiting hours, but being able to use it for off-hours events. And those might be community-led conservation stories or conversations that are happening where outside groups are actually using this space to come in and help to address issues that they're seeing within their local community. So it doesn't just have to be Woodland Park sponsoring these events, but it could be more seen as a community center for the community to come to. And I think that has become a part for us that we find really intriguing with the program of this space, is being able to be this location for these conversations to take place and to have something as a recognizable destination within the zoo that is not just about the animals that are there, but is centered around this community-led conservation. And so while it might not be the equivalent of talking about Phinney Ridge as our community and our neighborhood, it's really thinking more broadly about Seattle and conservation that's happening in the Pacific Northwest, and how can we help to further build that community.
Yeah, we've heard some interesting, there are interesting programs the zoo runs that are not necessarily intended to reach everybody, at their house, but things like browse donations, which means sort of plant donations, especially from larger settings where the zoo can be assured of a certain level of quality. They're actually there's also a composting, like a zoo, poop composting program that people sign up for and love because the compost, is of such high quality. And so there are these sort of programmatic environmental links and exchanges that happen with the broader community, not necessarily the immediate neighborhood. But I had never heard of those particular programs before being part of this project, and I think those are also really great stories to feature in terms of the zoo's impact and reach.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, maybe a good question for the commissioners to help us think about is, kind of building off of what Scott said, we really want this to be a community hub, but there is a gate. And so what are the ways that it can happen? But in our minds, you know, if Jay Inslee is going to talk about initiatives around, or Governor Inslee is going to talk around initiatives around climate change or saving the forests in the Pacific Northwest, we want this to be the place that he comes to. If there are community groups that, you know, want to get together to have a conversation about the work that's being done here, you know, how can this be the place, you know, and that they think of Woodland Park Zoo as a place where this can happen, whether it's this literal project or whether this project is a catalyst to other places on Woodland Park, being a place for that to really make it feel like, in a broader sense, it's connected to who we are, and some of those initiatives.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. And after questioning, hopefully we can have further conversation about that kind of greeting experience. On a related question, have you done much thinking about the arrival to site by transit?
Well, I'll touch on this, and maybe the folks at Woodland Park can talk about it. I mean, we haven't really been changing too much the gates, you know, and so we are thinking about how people get here and who gets here, but our impact. It's a good question, but the impact from the project is a little less directly integrated, like in the ways that some of the projects on the West Entry and other recent projects that the zoo has undertaken have kind of been impacted by that.
I do want to say that it's a very timely question that you have, because I have been working with Marvin, our DEAI executive, and talking about how can we get folks to the zoo. I know that Metro has a VIA program, for example, that they bring folks to Kubota Garden. So these are very, like, this week early conversations that we're having about that. We have looked at transportation services in the past and partnered, but it hasn't really proven to be successful. Some of the comments that we got was it's hard to take strollers, for example, onto a bus. A lot of folks have the need for that when they're coming to the zoo, but I think that there's some opportunities there that we're pursuing. I think possibly having like a shuttle program might be the best way. We are a little off the beaten path for the light rail, and some of the bus, we do have bus right up next to our doors, but again, being a regional hub, I think we should be looking at other opportunities. So it's under conversations again.
All right, I want to keep us moving because we're almost at our half-hour mark. But did you have any other further questions, Molly?
I have one final question, which is just about materials and the relationship between carbon sequestration of forests and building materials. And so I recognize that a lot of this will develop in the future, but I'm curious if you've started to establish any relationships with groups like the Nature Conservancy, FSC certified organizations, just for that early thinking.
You know, Sky, feel free to jump in, but I'll say, you know, we're at the early stages of that, but we, you know, as a team, as a design team, you know, embodied carbon is something that we've been looking into deeply, and we've already had conversations about that being an important part of how we think about this project. It goes back to what's built and what isn't, but I mean, we will be doing a full-on analysis and diving deeply into that as one of our probably primary sustainability initiatives. And it's not just the embodied carbon, but also, you know, thinking about the energy and the carbon impact of the project itself. Scott, do you want to?
I see Sherry has her hand up. I'll let you go first, Sherry.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to tie this question back to the partnership question from earlier and the definition of avatar question. I think they kind of all come together, because part of what we're trying to do with those avatars is have those species represent a community-led conservation effort that's in a forest, and also an action that our guests can take here at home, and a partner with whom we've been working for a long time. So that's kind of the three bits there. And red pandas have been brought forward as an option because of work we've done for many years with the Red Panda Network and communities in Nepal that work to guard. They're called forest guardians, to guard the red pandas and the habitat there. And red pandas are the perfect avatar, and the Red Panda Network does a lot of work with FSC paper and wood. So we got super excited about selling bamboo toilet paper in the exhibit experience space. But that's what we're trying to do with those avatars. And so choosing red pandas was particularly tied to having FSC choices for consumers brought forward.
And I'll just add that when it then comes to the experience that we're developing, we're going to want to leverage whatever we do on the site to the greatest extent possible to give further example to these actions that we're trying to encourage others to do. It would be a waste if we're asking everyone to do all these things, but we weren't considering them ourselves. So as we've been getting into talking about structural approaches to what we have with our engineers, we're very much at the beginning discussing embodied carbon. We're looking at the existing building that's there, that's primarily concrete walls. Are there opportunities for taking and trying to reuse portions of that? Maybe it's not reusing it in place, but it's trying to take and reuse some of the materials in a way that we can bring them back into our project in a new form. And then I think one other piece in addition to that has to do with energy and other resource use on the zoo's campus. And we've had some really great conversations with a variety of zoo facility and keeper staff to understand how they currently use portions of that site, such as for growing browse for the animals to eat, and how can we amplify that? How can we amplify things like the Zoodoo project, as well as the community drop-off browse? And so we're really looking at this as a great opportunity for both showcasing the work that's happening abroad with conservation, but then also showing the ways in which sustainability is being approached right on the zoo's campus currently.
Thank you so much. I will hand it off to Matt.
Hi, thanks. I want to thank you guys, Element and the zoo for this presentation. I think it's a really excellent presentation. And I will, full disclosure, I'm very interested in the zoo. I live just a couple blocks to the east of Lower Woodland Park, and I've lived there for over 20 years. So spent a lot of time in the zoo when my daughter was young, and we always walked because we were able to. I also am an architect, and I was on the design team for the West Entry buildings, the restroom, the retail shop, the admin building, and the plaza. And then I've worked on a number of other elements, parking lots. So I know the site really well. So I have a couple questions about architectural character and program. But before I say that, I also want to thank you for bringing this to this discussion at a conceptual design level. I think it's really intriguing, and there's some really wonderful design exploration happening here, which I think is very exciting about where you might be able to take this, or creates a lot of opportunity. On program, it kind of looks to me like there's a lot of little program bits that are being explored for this 1 acre site. And it almost kind of feels like it's a mini zoo. And for example, it's got retail, it has food and beverage, it has makerspace, it has research, it has animal care, it has exhibit. Do you know what I mean? It's an awful lot of things, some of which, and they're great ideas you're exploring. You're exploring about the ways that, economics affect conservation or destruction of a habitat, and how can that, how can zoo patrons, become more aware. Is there, as the exploration of this program, could some of these program elements, it seems like right now they're kind of duplicating something that's nearby. So there's the retail shop at the West Entry, directly across from maybe where your smaller retail would be. Would there be a bigger impact if the ideas you're developing about awareness actually go to the retail and rework that retail. Do you know what I mean? For what?
Yeah. So Matt,
Yeah.
Matt, first of all, it's lovely to see you and Pooja here on the design commission. So that's fantastic. But that's a great question and something that I love it because these are questions that we're grappling with and thinking through. I think Jen can really maybe dig into this for us a little bit here.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think especially in the past, I would say a month or so, we've really been trying to start to prioritize. I think that's a big piece of this project right now. And there's a bit of a balance, and there's this balance between there's animal habitats, there's human spaces, there's this desire for kind of consumer behavior to happen on the site. And I think it's a really great question because it is something that we are still exploring, and I think we are slowly fine-tuning our way down to that. There was a slide we used to show, we might want to bring it back, where we talk about what happens in this project, what happens at the whole zoo, and what happens outside of the zoo, like outside the walls of the zoo. And your question really speaks to that, which is, are we doing too much on this one in this one place? Right. Could we be more impactful if we streamline what we're doing? So I think there's definitely room for discussion there.
I think that I love the idea of the makerspace, but the Zoo Museum is right there, and it's kind of partially sometimes, you know what I mean? It doesn't have all the equipment of makerspace, but it's a place where kids go, it's to do stuff. And then of course the main cafeteria. So I think that's wonderful. I mean, again, I think the ideas you're exploring here are really powerful. Now, the other question I've always had architecturally about the zoo, and as an architect of the West Entry who contributed to this perhaps problem, which is every 10 years or so, an architect's hired to build something and they sort of bring their own architectural character language. So you have the West Entry, which is perhaps a little over orthogonal. As the firm I work for, there was a language. It was very particular. Then you have the cafeteria building, maybe perhaps that's from the late 70s. It has a very particular thing. You have the Zoo Museum, sort of Methune's sort of REI kind of architectural character. And so we end up having this sort of theme park of architectures, which I don't think is great. But what I think you're starting to do is maybe do an un-architecture or an anti-architecture, which maybe goes back to what Jill said. It almost feels like you are heading in a direction where it's not really about an architecture, it's more about a movement. And if that can actually stay as you move into schematic design, I think that might be really wonderful, because again, you might be setting a framework for future zoo projects where it's not about a little building that represents that architect and that moment in time, but it's more about an anti-building or an anti-architecture, you know what I mean? That's really just a series of connections. So that's not really a question, but it's an observation that I felt the zoo and those of us who've worked in the zoo maybe we just keep adding to this issue rather than going in a different direction.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that's in line with our thinking. Therein lies the next steps, to be successful. We really have to dig into that, I think. You gave us a bit of a challenge with your guest services building right there on the edge of our site. But Scott, do you want to dig into this a little bit?
Yeah, I think we're in line with you, Matt, in terms of if it's more about this experience and that the circulation and movement through the site becomes the primary thing that you're encountering, then we think that would be more successful, and less about approaching an object, entering into the object, and then later exiting out of it. I think there's still going to be times where we're going to need to go from inside to outside. And what we really want to do with that, I think, going back to some of those concept diagrams we had, is how can this building feel as if it is an extension of that canopy that's already there, and that edge that you have to pass through is very thin feeling and experientially almost feels like it's not even there. And we've been talking about how at certain times of year, we're going to need to control the temperatures and conditions within spaces for the sake of the animals, as well as to encourage more people to hopefully come to the zoo in those rainier times of years. But when weather permits, we want the ability for this building or experience to open itself up and be as porous as possible, and so that there's air moving directly through in a way that you wouldn't experience if you had to enter through a set of double doors. So I think that's a really key priority for us, is trying to make this feel as light a touch as possible on the site, and more something that you feel like you're moving through the entire thing rather than you've arrived and now you're here and then later you exit.
I think that's what I'm gathering from these studies. I think the physical model images and the sketches are moving in that direction. So I'm really excited to see where you take that architecture. In the model, there's a sort of translucent diaphanous roof form. Is that actually a roof, or is that just a suggestion of movement? And then again, the sections or the sketches show this elevated platform, and then the other sections show, the other drawing shows someone walking up high. Is that it's sort of like three different mediums being explored?
I think in terms of the model, at the time that we were exploring that, we were imagining, like, could we have this more diaphanous roof form that goes through, and it does allow shelter from the elements of say rain, or give ability of control of what can happen in the spaces underneath. But how do we make it feel that it's not an opaque surface that you've been cut off from the elements around you? With the pathways, we're imagining that there are pathways on this site that actually are weaving themselves through the trees, and they're not necessarily under say a roof canopy, but they have this very light touch, and they allow you to be within those exceptional groves of trees while having a limited impact of what's happening on the ground plane with the root systems.
I think that'd be wonderful if we could achieve that at 1 to 12 or 1 to 20.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at.
That's exciting. Okay, the last thing I want to just comment on is I'm also excited to see the idea in this one sketch that I think I forgot which fellow discussed it. The idea of transparency, where zoo patrons are understanding and actually seeing the animal husbandry and the care, because I think one of the things that so obviously is challenging about zoos is they're a simulacrum. They're kind of fake, right? I mean, they're a pretend experience, but if you can break down that sort of barrier where right now a lot of the work of taking care of the animals happens behind a concrete wall that nobody ever knows or has limited knowledge of. I think really bringing that forward into the experience would be pretty exciting, again, and forward thinking. And what it reminds me of, and it's different discipline though, is the new Burke Museum, where museum patrons can see archaeologists or natural scientists doing work as part of the experience of looking at the artifacts or and so it seems like that's a strong idea, a strong programmatic idea that has a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Greg.
It's okay, Asami. I could just quickly respond. That's a great comment, great observation. That is 100% the direction that the Woodland Park Zoo team wants to head in. It's it's a paradigm shift for sure. There are institutions throughout the world that are evolving in this direction. This notion of what we call transparency in animal care and husbandry. It's not to say that many of these animals will not require spaces for isolation and behind the scenes, if you will. But there are many, many, many activities and aspects of what the Woodland Park Zoo does that's absolutely incredible, that should be more evident to the guests. And so that is definitely a part of this paradigm shift and part of what's going to end up driving a lot of the programmatic spaces that will evolve out of this.
Thanks again. I need to pass it off to Pooja to keep the conversation going, but looking forward to seeing more. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I also wanted to say that this presentation is fantastic. It's a really, really cool project. Excited about it. One of the things that I was noticing through the presentation is how your desire to connect this project to the world it's really cool. But the piece that I feel like is probably not the responsibility of the project, but more, Katie, to the point of the zoo, is that there are things about the zoo itself that make it inherently more accessible to white people and higher income families. And you're talking about trying to draw in underrepresented groups, but things like the neighborhood that it's in, and someone mentioned transportation, and even the hours that the zoo is open to the public, those things do limit the accessibility to people that work different hours and live in different neighborhoods. And I think, you know, in the world of virtual zoo visits, that's you know, an option, but it's not an equitable one. So I'm wondering if there is conversation around that that's happening at a different level from maybe the project itself, because we can't encourage that inclusion of underrepresented groups if they can't get there.
Yeah, I know we got to move quickly, so I'll just really briefly answer this. I think the Woodland Park Zoo as a organization is really diving into those questions. They have a lot of initiatives outside of this project. I don't know if they're initiatives, but thinking and studying to really dig into what you're talking about. I think specifically for this project, Pooja, some of the things that we're thinking about are not only the design of the project itself, but the interpretive material. Are the voices, are the ways that we're talking about issues, are they things that resonate with some of those communities that maybe typically haven't been as engaged, so that it becomes relevant to the way they're thinking? How do we capture those voices? I know we haven't gotten there yet. We're still early days here, but that is the intent, to see how we can do that. And I think relative to the thoughts about reaching globally, one thing that maybe didn't resonate as much, I realize in our presentation, we talk about the place and the animals, but it's also the people. The people are important. And it's our intent that the people are an important part of this conversation. We're trying to think about how we connect people here with other communities they might not typically be connected with. How do we bring those voices here? And that's going to be a challenge, but it's something that we're typically trying to work through.
And I think we don't have the answer yet, to be honest. We're working, as I mentioned, with our DEAI consultant and our DEAI executive, as well as the Empathy Collaborative, because one thing I know in this public work is that what we think will help people is not what will help people. We need them to tell us, and we need to work with them to know what would work best for access. So it is something that we are, these programs just started. I started here in October 2021, and those programs were just starting as I got on board as well. So they're new projects to get at that.
Thank you. I'll pass it along to Amalia.
Thanks. So all the accolades for the presentation. I just wanted to circle back, and apologies if you already said this. What is the priority age range for this space at the zoo?
I can answer that. There is no priority. This is for it really is for everyone. This is not it's not the Zoomasium, for example, which has a really specific age range. And it's one of the things that's really interesting about this project. It's when we start talking about the indoor-outdoor question, there's an indoor space for kids to go play, and B, is there what's kind of a covered space for adults to be in as well, adults and kids, a place where everyone finds something. And so it's a challenge to figure out how to make, kind of have all of these different experiences relate to different age ranges. So.
That sounds good. I think one thing, well, that's a recommendation. I'll say that. Sorry, stay in my lane. So one of the other pieces, and other people touched upon this a little bit, but I'm gonna take accessibility back to like this project level. And I thought there was the interesting factoid about the 10% of the people visiting the zoo identify as a disability, and then you add the reality of strollers into that. And so I was just wondering how you're thinking about movement of space. You're showing a lot of movement in different directions and it not really being linear. And that's a very different approach than other exhibits at the zoo. And I will say, as a parent of multiple young children, that like gives me so much anxiety that like I wouldn't be able to see them, and that there would be all these different sight distances, and like there's like 13 exits they could leave from that take them in very disparate directions from me. And I've got a stroller, and then I don't know, like everybody's coming at me in different places. And so just wondering if you talked about that. I love it, but I would not want to take my kids there. And I just think over the past 2 years, this has been a safe, well-maintained place for people to take their kids that felt very consistent and reassuring, and had all these other benefits. And so this being so centrally located, I just wonder if that's come up in your conversations or in the engagement. And then related to that, I would just say, like, the zoo ultimately is, I mean, the perception I feel is the zoo is a place for kids, and this is a very centrally located space. And I just would want to, so my question is, how have like the children of the interacting with this space that other exhibits are prioritized for smaller children come into this? And like the width of these paths and all of that.
Yeah, early days in the design, but Jen, do you want to speak to this, and then maybe I'll throw something out?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's been surprising to me, I have young kids as well. One thing that's been interesting to me about the zoo is to learn that, in fact, a large percentage of people come here without kids, way more than I realized. So we are looking to try to create a place that can be for both kids and parents. I do hear your point, and I think it's a really good point. And I think we should maybe think a little more about that as we go forward. But I know that we have been certainly concerned about safety and access for children. It has come up in our conversations. Scott, I feel like you might have something to add here.
Yeah, I would just say, I think in a way, the idea that you mentioned of there are all these pathways and we see them exit and all of a sudden they're gone is the opposite of what maybe we're hoping the experience of this is, which is that it's not a maze. You're not on it and then lost and can't find your way around, but instead, going back to that idea of interconnection, it's you can explore every aspect of this space, it feels like, but you're always still connected back to all the other things that are going on. And so what we want is the ability for these pathways to deliver you to unique moments, but while you're at that unique moment, you're still in the overall experience of it, not having instead a set of pathways where you're just experiencing all of these individual things, but you don't really understand what it adds up to. So I think the hope would be that by taking that approach, we're not taking and creating these invisible areas where children can go off and disappear, but instead encouraging people to explore the space and understand the overall story.
Yeah, and I think, Scott, that's really great. And Amalia, great question, but I do want to, to Jen's point, there are other people that come here, and I kind of have that notion too. I came to the zoo with my kids. It was a place for kids, but I'd like us all to challenge that a little bit. And how can it include more, especially as we talk about trying to capture other groups that maybe think about the space differently than we do when we go there. And so I think it's an interesting question. I think also zoos and Woodland Park historically have had the model where it is a linear path. And there's a lot of museums and exhibits that take that model. But there are also a lot that take a model where choose your own adventure is not the right thing, but it allows more flexibility in the way that you approach it. And I'm not saying we want to do that everywhere or in everything in this exhibit, but I think we do want to get a little bit away from the scripted the experience. We're trying to get away from that. So you bring up a good question. Once you do that, you introduce a lot of inherent challenges, and we're going to have to work through those challenges. But I think that is our goal. Our goal is to allow it to move away in this exhibit, not everywhere else in the zoo. And again, the Zoomasium exists. We're not trying to recreate the Zoomasium. But there's a different inherent goal in this project. And so, there are play spaces for younger kids. There are places that you can take your kids. Those aren't going away. Anyways, great question.
Thank you. I'll pass it on to Vanita.
Thanks, Amalia. I had a question about what you're calling the exchange, the heart of the whole space. And for one thing, in scale, and I know this is still very early concept, it feels like quite large, like in proportion and as a plaza scale, similar scale to the West Entry, which is a big, open space where a lot of people come in and out. And so there's a reason for the scale of that plaza. So could you speak to what do you see happening in that exchange? And so what is it you're trying to fit within there, and how is that driving how you're spatializing it at this point?
Jen and Scott, you guys want to?
Scott, why don't you take this one? Thank you.
All right. I think in terms of the things we could imagine happening within that space, it could range anything from groups hanging out on a rainy day just to get off the paths to large events taking place where there could be conversations around conservation research that's being done. And we don't see the exchange or the plaza as being this space that has formal events with seats out necessarily, and it's closed off from everything around it. But we imagine the animals are able to occupy that space as well. So it's not seen as just a human-centered space. It's seen as an area where you can gather, but that doesn't mean that the landscape hasn't invaded that area as well. And so we're holding a circle right now of area to say this is about the size that we want to have for people to be able to gather, of the group sizes that we want. But as we move forward with this, we want to find as much as possible ways of blurring the edges of what that space even looks like, so that at times you might feel like you're hanging out in a landscape rather than hanging out in a community center as a distinction. So it does take up a large amount of area in relation to our overall program. And because of that, we want to make this as flexible as possible so that it feels like a space that can be directly connected to the outdoors, as well as being able to be a controlled enough space that you could have an event within it.
Thanks, that's really helpful.
I was just going to add that there are seasonality to the zoo too. And so one of the things that we're balancing is large numbers of guests coming through in the summer and small numbers of guests coming through in the winter. And how do we create a place that can ebb and flow and flex, as Scott mentioned, so that we can accommodate these bigger groups having this experience and then these smaller groups, and not having it feel like too oversized or too small.
And I have one more question, and this builds a little bit on what Matt started asking about, because I think he's right. It does feel a little bit like you're creating a mini zoo within a zoo, or trying to get all of the same program elements that exist in other places within this space. And it also feels like in the approach to teaching people about conservation that there's a lot of emphasis on economics and commerce, and how we can support conservation through our wallets, which is certainly one way. But could you or it felt like it comes through kind of strongly to me in the thinking right now. And I think I'd be curious for you to just expand on that a little bit, and how am I reading too much into it, or is there a fairly kind of an intentional thinking here about the economics of conservation?
I don't know, Jen or Sherry, do you guys want to take that?
I can take it. It's a great point, and it is overemphasized because we do intend to also talk about, because we're not going to save the world or change our climate challenges through individual actions only. It's very much collective action. So part of the birth of the plaza or the exchange space was the importance of dialogue and helping people connect with other people to realize and discuss, right, what the challenges are and try to build solutions among themselves. But we've also talked very frequently, and have done this in the past as well, creating a space where advocacy comes forward. So your vote matters, and write to your legislators, and actually here are some topics on which you can write to your legislators right now, and here's a space where you can look up who your legislator is, right? So there are definitely things beyond just purchasing that are about other actions that don't cost money, and a lot of building of awareness and empowering people to take action that either they can do individually or collectively in their communities. I think they're just less well formed at this point. So
Yeah, I would also add that I think what we're trying to do is sort of balance this. We talk about the individual, the collective, and then policy, and trying to create a place that allows you to move between those. It doesn't feel like there's a, it's overwhelming, but that there are kind of these connections, and again, back to these stories that link those things together. So I think the makerspace, for example, which we think of as something much sort of broader, as Sherry was saying, could take on more prominence, and really does, I think, in the way that we think about this program, take on more prominence in some of this interpretive space, and the way that we're helping guests understand the world, and of course the animal spaces being large too. So very good point though, that it feels larger. Katie has her hand up.
I was just going to talk really briefly. It is intentional, and it has to do with the theory of change. We've had a lot of research that's shown what people can do to take that first step in advocacy. And there's a lot of information that we've been going over, but essentially it gets very overwhelming, right? The world is falling apart. I'm one person. What am I going to do about it? And then people don't do anything because it's just too hard. And what we found through our research is that one thing that particularly Americans identify with is how they buy products and how they can use that as a voice. And so that is one of the first steps to then possibly doing more, like we're talking about legislative action, getting behind voting and policies and things like that. So that first step is intentional to kind of give somebody an action. And then the other things like makerspace is another thing. How can I collectively do something to change here at the zoo, in my own backyard, and globally? So there's been a lot of conversation about that.
Anita, this is Michael. We are right at 11.
Yeah, and I'm done.
No. I hate to be the buzzkill because this is such a rich conversation, but that's my job. So we have a hard stop at 11:15 because of our next presenter. So you guys have a challenge to wrap this up in 15 minutes with the vote.
Yep.
So I'll mute. Thank you for letting me be the buzzkill.
Thank you, Michael. I was gonna be that person, but you jumped in. I'm gonna defer any questions because I think we've had a really healthy discussion up until this point. So we will move to deliberation at this point, and I would ask each of the commissioners, in one minute or less, to really talk about, I think, maybe the most salient points. It's sounding to me like, generally there's a lot of excitement and support for this project, but it'd be interesting to hear maybe some major points about what is most attractive about this, or are there recommendations of things that we would like to see or learn more about in forthcoming presentations? So with that, I will turn it over to Jill.
Thank you. So thanks again for doing this. I think this is fantastic. And I think you have a really great opportunity here to develop multiple concepts. I hope that you'll bring back a couple of different concepts to us in schematic design. I think it'd be great to emphasize some of the things that we heard. One of the things I heard that I thought was most important was Laura and others talking about how the landscape is a huge part of the zoo experience. And I think the landscape is the connective tissue. It does heal those things that Matt talked about, all the different styles and the different ideas, because over the years at the zoo, we've seen a lot of different ideas. Children's theater, no children's theater, elephants, no elephants. interactive, build a Zoomasium. You know, so there's a lot of impulses there, and there's a chance to heal a lot of that with this project. And so I would really encourage you to look at the landscape to lead on that. I guess the word that I would put forward and hope that you bring us a concept next time that has one more sort of humble design intervention, that you bracket what you bring us from the least to the most, so that we really get a chance to see how little or how much is needed to achieve your goals. And I also think you need to know that we will be looking very, very carefully about how you've filled in the blanks about what perspectives are missing and how that outreach and how those other things evolve, because you've got great intentions. And one of the things that we're going to do as we go through these different stages is really measure how you're meeting those. So thank you very, very much. And I will pass it off.
Okay, Erica.
Sorry, try to keep it moving for everyone. Hi, everyone, again. Thank you so much for this and for the conversation that you just had. I think they were wonderful. And I think I'm going to sort of hearken to a lot of what Jill stated here. I think that the zoo can be so powerful in the communication tools that it expresses. When I was a kid, and I kind of go back to that, I was a part of a program at the Bronx Zoo in New York, and it was really very critical to my upbringing. It was a summer camp where they bussed us in from Brooklyn. It was entirely free. It was weeks long. And it's where myself and many other people first got engaged in conservation and sort of learned to care more about our experience and our environment. These were kids who did not grow up in places where there were forests and trees. And, you know, we grew up in a very, very urban concrete jungle. And so I can't express how important these central civic places can be. And I think that really came up in the questions that folks were asking about access, about the program of the space, and not the physical program, but how the programs of the zoo itself engage and direct the focus of this space. So I think the questions that came up around what are the greater initiatives of the zoo itself, I think really need to be critically understood before the sort of additional movement of the design of this form shape, because it can't act in isolation. If this is all about connections, it's all about reaching out to a more diverse community, the greater programs of the park itself have to inform what happens in this space, or it's just lipstick on a pig, to be quite honest. It's not truly going to be able to perform in the way that the intention is. And so those are the words that sort of stood out to me, were programs, stewardship, for the activity that can take place, and then what the access, as Pooja brought up, to this space are. You know, I think, as was mentioned, thinking really critically about how people get here. This is an extremely affluent area, and the people, in order to, I think, truly become engaged in this place, it needs consistent involvement and sort of engagement from those folks. It can't be like we got this gift of a single class trip once a year. Like, I really do think for this place to be impactful, people need to be able to consistently visit this site and be able to see and be involved in those adaptations and changes that you're so beautifully sort of denoting within the concept itself. So I think that's where I'd love, and I'm excited to see it go, is like, what does that connection out into the farther reaches look like, and how does the program of the park itself get expressed through this site? And I'll pass it on.
Thank you. I'm going to add on a little bit to what Erica just talked about. I'm hoping that you'll take a close look at who's at the table for all the decision making, designing and programming, et cetera, and and possibly enlarge who's at the table, because that's a really good way to get that kind of information about what's needed, what's required for this to be really a place for all. In terms of access, I'm going to, I noted paid entrance. I'm going to suggest you look at Tacoma institutions, museums, and also parks, zoos, and just see some of the, get a sense of some of the outreach that they've done, which has been very accessible. And it does have to do with free events and, free access and also transportation to spaces. They've been pretty successful in my opinion. Some I asked about what this will be in, so you posed us a question about what this will be in X number of years. And I'm wondering if there's a monitoring and data gathering effort that can be added to the programming that will actually, and this could involve members of the public as well. How does this space perform? What are the expectations? How are they being met? It's something that scientists do on a regular basis for health of rivers and shorelines and oceans. And so maybe this project could have a monitoring component that then can show up in real time, possibly to the public. I think that's pretty interesting information. I think Scott talked about transparency and porous situations, and I think how you work with that going forward into the next phase of design is going to be really interesting for us to see porosity in all dimensions, three-dimensionally, diagonally, horizontally, vertically. I think those are really interesting spaces to look at in physical space, but also in conceptual space. And one last thing, there are a couple of things that made me jump. I agree with Vanita about the emphasis on retail, so I'm somewhat reassured by what you were talking about, but I would suggest that you ask, how are we doing this differently from Starbucks? And really be creative about how that message gets across in the retail environment, the message you want to get across. And also the term secret weapon made me jump. So I'm wondering if secret strategy might be more appropriate as you go forward. And thank you. I'm now passing this on to Molly.
Great, thank you. All right, so things that jumping off of what Benita was asking, I'm really interested to hear next time how hummingbirds work with the Headwater tribes and with underrepresented communities ends up shaping the definition of conservation, of community action, of stewardship, and of the relationship with the natural environment. So I'll be really interested to see how that engagement can go beyond kind of inclusion of those groups and become community leadership for those ideas within the space. So how can we take what you have learned about kind of how the commercial component is inspiring some groups toward conservation and understand, okay, what's inspiring all of these groups and how can that be made central to the opportunities for activity and for action within the space. So how can they continue to be leaders within the space, and how can their vision of those concepts really guide how the space is used and experienced by them and by a variety of groups who access the space. Also, I'll be interested to hear the continued development of the embodied carbon story and how the materials relate to the region and to the global story about the impacts of carbon sequestration, as well as how it relates to broader forestry practices here or elsewhere. And then at the zoo level, so less at the architectural level, but as the continued studies happen from the zoo, I'll be interested to hear how VIA and the Empathy Collaborative are influencing how access is provided from the broader communities so that we can understand who's arriving to the space, who's being able to arrive to the space to then be centered once they're within the space. And I will go ahead and pass it off to Matt.
I think I made a lot of comments earlier during the question period, so I'll just leave it there and pass it on to Pooja. Thanks.
I will also pass it along to Amalia.
Thanks. I just wanted to kind of bring all my points together. So I do think that it would be interesting as part of this discussion to ground where the different focuses of different age groups are in the zoo compared to this space. And that ties with my kind of questions related to the capacity of these paths. Even if this space isn't going to be meant for children, people still will be there with kids. And even if I'm an adult without a child, like being able to move nicely through the space without having to traverse strollers or other people's things they bring to the zoo is going to add to the comfort of the space. And I'm worried about some pinch points to that exchange, and you can't have an exchange if you can't get there. And I'd like to see that in relationship again to kind of some of the other sizes of paths. I do agree that there's primary and tertiary, and I understand all that, but in the next round, kind of having some highlight on that. And then finally, I feel like there's a disconnect between all of the wonderful points you made about the function of a forest canopy and the ground floor by what appears to be an impervious layer as a roof. And I like the idea that there's protection, weather protection, in making this a space all year round. And there are lots of other open spaces at the zoo, but I want to see more about the materiality of the roof, and if it is pervious at locations, or if it can be a green roof, or if there should be more tree planting to create a natural canopy, particularly related to impervious surfaces on, again, at the zoo as a whole, and if there's goals for this space around tree canopy and impervious surfaces and how that all fits in. That's not a transportation thing, but I'm going to go out of my lane and say that, and I'm going to pass it on to Vanita.
Great, thank you. You know, in general, this is a really exciting project, and I love the fact that you're starting with this approach and building from there. The things that jump out at me, one, you know, I agree with Matt that possibly there's an attempt to put too much program into this space, and should there be some thinking about whether or not adjacent spaces might be modified or should be modified at some point in the future to accommodate some of this program. And I say that partly because this project is called Forest for All, which I think is a great concept. I love the idea that we're looking at all ages, and it's forest first. But the most critical thing about that is creating this forest from, you know, a disparate mix of some really nice trees, but they're not functioning as a forest right now. So you're really going to create that habitat that's not there right now, and do that in a way that then supports the animals that you'll be identifying. And so I'm a little concerned that maybe like the early massing, which isn't necessarily building, I get that, it might be too large, or the scale of some of it might be too big. And so as you move forward, really just like right sizing everything and questioning each program element and where it needs to be, I think is really important. I do think, since, you know, the big goal is conservation and raising awareness, that whatever you build in the architecture should be a model of sustainability. It sounds like you're already thinking that way. But, you know, as was just mentioned, is, you know, could everything have a green roof? Could, you know, what materials could you be using? Like, is this an opportunity for mass timber? Maybe that's not appropriate, but what would be the most sustainable of all your choices? And then how can you relate that back to how this helps the forest in our region and worldwide? It just seems like a great demonstration of the bigger mission. And then I guess the other thing I would say, I've always thought, I've spent a lot of time at the zoo. I also live close by and walk in. And when my kids were little, we were there like every week. And they've done zoo camps and all of that. So it's a great resource, and I've always thought of it as an educational institution. And I guess I asked the question about commerce because I do think economics is really important in conservation. I know the zoo also needs to function and be able to do all its missions, and then, you know, raising money is part of that. But I think that the program elements where people can be hands-on and learning things directly seem really strong. And maybe you buy your coffee next right by in the West Plaza. I don't know. I think education is a huge part of the zoo, and it's something I've really appreciated. And the nature experiences, because you can feel really immersed in nature in different places. So thank you so much. Look forward to seeing this as you progress.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So we're just a few minutes over time, so I'm going to keep this summary very brief, and we can follow up with additional notes and recommendations to you. But overall, hearing a lot of support, as I said, is really a great and comprehensive presentation. There's obviously a ton of thought that has been put into this, as evidenced by all the great discussion that we've had today. I think we also appreciate just the forward-thinking nature of this. It's great to be living in a region where our zoo is trying to be, the new way to zoo. The idea of connecting globally, raising awareness of conservation is all fantastic. And this is an incredibly ambitious project. I think your outreach to diverse groups and the focus on that is amazing, and I think we're going to encourage you to do more of that, and we look forward to hearing more of that. And then just commending you on the the focus on education and the immersive approach is really incredible. I think, some of the recommendations that I heard today, some of the strongest ones was to continue to think about how the zoo can be accessible to underrepresented populations, and also think about how your outreach is going to inform the concepts and the programming that you're going to continue to develop. From more of the building architectural side, consider a more minimalist approach, and bring back a range of options that show sort of, more of that minimalist to maybe a more heavy programmed approach and what that looks like. And I think just generally, thinking about more options. And the other thing that I also heard was this concept of, is there too much program, and thinking about maybe are there other areas of the zoo that can host some of the ambitious programming that you're thinking about. So with that, I'm just going to wrap it up, and I think we will ask for a vote of the commissioners to support this concept design. So
maybe we vote in alphabetical order by name, starting with Amalia.
Okay. Amalia?
I vote to approve the concept as presented.
Great. I will also vote to approve.
I will vote to approve.
Great.
I'll vote to approve as well.
Erica, you're next.
Am I allowed to vote now? I know we're like, I think I can now. I vote to approve. Yes, okay, sweet.
And I will vote to approve too.
Great. And then who's after Jill? Is that Matt? Matt, did we lose you? Okay, we'll move on to Molly.
I vote to approve as well.
Great. Pooja?
I also vote to approve.
And Vanita?
And vote to approve. Thank you.
Great. And Matt, I see you on there, but we didn't hear from you. Are you voting?
We just made him a presenter again.
Oh, okay. Well, I think with that, we have enough votes to, it's basically approved. So, so thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing this again in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Great comments, a lot for us to think about as always. So thank you, Elaine, for taking that action. And hopefully when we come in front of you guys again, it'll be in person. That's our hope. And we can bring some models and really share more of our design thinking. So look forward
Bring
to
some
that.
animals.
We will. We'll do
some
that.
cute animals.
All right,
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Lauren Flemister, thank you for your